Gotta get this thing started. Waiting. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and friend and partner and colleague, business and colleague and life colleague, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian. I'm messing up the introduction already. Brian, this is that kind of day, you guys. It's that kind of day already. We're going to have an amazing conversation today here on Just Two Dads. I'm going to tell you, we definitely have a topic, and it is going to be all-inclusive. So sit tight. Hang on as we take another episode of Just Two Dads. As we all get older, that's the point of today's show. So hey everybody, I'm Brian Altunian. This is another episode of Just Two Dads. First of all, I want to welcome all of you who are catching us on our Facebook pages. Welcome. Please feel free to put comments in the section here. If we can, we'll throw them into onto the screen. If you're not catching us live on Facebook, you catch us on our YouTube channel. We are Just Two Dads on our YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Send episodes to friends if it makes a difference in their lives. Hopefully it will. I want to thank everybody who's listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you're hearing podcasts. Welcome. Hopefully you'll reach out to us and send us a note or send us a comment or maybe a topic that you'd like us to cover. And then if you're hearing us on WSTX AM radio in the U.S. Virgin Islands, hello, happy holidays to everybody. And thank you, Joe. My daughter, Joe, is piping in. It's sort of a special day today. We're excited. Shawn and I started this conversation we've started this conversation about 5.5, 6 years ago, but this podcast came out of the conversations we were having as fathers of children who were dealing with learning disabilities and other special needs issues. And we decided to get together and create a podcast where we could support the community that we are members of and highlight those that are doing amazing work in the space, that are providing great services to folks in the special needs community so that we can actually build a better web around this community that often needs a lot of extra support, community involvement, inclusion, empathy, and love. And so that's why we're here. And this conversation kind of goes beyond the special needs community. It impacts the special needs community for sure, but it has reach that goes beyond. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over and say hello to Shawn Francis. I'm not even going to ask you how you are today. I'm just going to say Shawn Francis because I know the answer. But
I'll tell you that I'm doing great, thankful, and I'm blessed. And I want to at least acknowledge why today is a special day, because at the time of our recording today is Brian's birthday. So happy birthday to you.
It is. Thank you. I woke up today sore. I don't know why. I didn't do anything to actually provoke the soreness. I just woke up and I had a little twinge in my back, and I thought, well, another revolution around the sun, another pain that I didn't, part of my body didn't know I had.
There you go. Well, our topic today is about how do you define masculinity? Generally speaking, that's one thing. So we'll cover how you define masculinity. How does that affect the manner in which you not only parent, but the type of dad that you are? And then how does that affect being a dad to a child with special needs? And then underneath that, depending on the time we have, we'll see how many layers of the onion we get to peel, because there's something to be said for how does that affect you, the manner in which, or your the dad that you are to a daughter, which is an example as to the type of man that she's going to be attracted to and more than likely spend her life with because of the example. But then there's also the flip side of that, which is how does that affect the manner in which you are a father to a son, because that is the example that he gets as to the type of man that he will become. So I'll ask you, since we're just having a conversation today, we don't have any guests, and it literally is just two dads. I almost have to, sit back and review my thoughts and everything. But when asked the question myself, but when asked, how do you define masculinity, and what was that like, your example, how you define that is obviously based on your experience growing up and everything. So tell us how you define that.
Well, it's interesting because I think your point is really right on. I think that when you look at the examples that are set for us, that helps us to sort of set the tone. And for those who have listened before, you've heard me tell the story. I was my parents divorced when I was very young. I was 2 years old, and my mother remarried, and my stepfather adopted me, which is why my last name is Altunian. I do not look Armenian. So all my Armenian friends are like, "You're not Armenian." I'm like, "Well, I am by name and by
culture,
by diet, by culture, by diet." And my father, my stepfather was came from a very strong Middle Eastern background. So his belief, about the position that a father held within a family was, I would say today probably be considered a little bit, I don't want to say backwards, but a little bit, old school, which is, I sit in the throne and come kiss the ring of the exalted one. A little bit like that. And it's sort of like, demand respect more than command respect. Right. And, demand compliance as opposed to command compliance. And so there's a big difference there. There's a big difference. You're going to talk to me because I'm the father, and this is the rule set out in our house. And so, a lot of times when we grow up in the shadow of that, we either do exactly that or exactly the opposite. I always say, right, we do exactly what our parents do or exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. My biological father, I did not meet till I was 25 years old. So I didn't have him as a role model, but his action by not being around was in a way a role model, right? So I look at that and I was like, was that there was an agreement that when my stepfather adopted, that my biological father would disappear, if you will, to some degree. Mm-hmm. And so, as a young adult processing what that meant, since there's the sense of abandonment or whatever that evokes for certain people, that's what it did for me, I would say, to some degree. So I have those two examples of masculinity in my life, right? Somebody who took, and again, I don't fault my biological father for taking the steps he did. It was something that was supported by therapists and my counselors, and it's something that my mom had requested. So he was doing what he felt was the right thing to do by the standards set by other people. So in other words, he kind of acquiesced a bit, where my stepfather was very strong-fisted. There was no. So I learned, sort of a masculine approach by having both of those models. One day, day in, day out, and then the other, where I didn't get to see it until I was, 25. So masculinity was defined for me by those two examples. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Some happy birthday greetings. I appreciate that. So, I think masculinity, definitely there's masculinity as it stands alone, and then there's masculinity in relation to femininity with your partner, if that's your chosen partner, and how my father treated my mother, set an example for me. So I think honestly, I think if you're in tune with what I would call both sides of your masculine makeup, your chance for having empathy goes up significantly. I think that, there's one thing about being strong, and not to get into a lot of details, but when it comes to my children, I am much more like my stepfather, and making sure that my children have this, they know that they have the support for me that they need to be successful humans in the world. I am a fierce warrior and fighter when it comes to my children. And when it comes to my other relationships, I am, I'm strong, I'm independent, and I'm also extremely empathetic and supportive, an ally. And so, I have the blend of both. And for me, I think true masculinity is the ability to pull from both sides of, the yin and the yang, the male female perspective. I think that your ability to have both is really a true sign of pure masculinity, where we're not afraid to share our emotions. That's the one side, right? So you and I have talked, people who have seen our episodes have known that we've been prone to shed a tear here live on our episodes. But I don't think that that's a lack of masculinity. In fact, I think that takes a very strong man to be able to express vulnerability and share that we have feelings and emotions, and we don't have to hold them down. And so again, I think that the ability to express both sides is what makes us masculine, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, what your feeling is. I was me rambling there for a minute, but
no. I agree with that. Growing up, my dad was in some way a man's man, because his father was that way. He was a completely self-made man. He and my grandmother, built businesses from the ground up, didn't finish high school, and yet they were successful and they contributed to the community. And when there was a task that's set to be done, the idea is that you're not going to stop until it's done and it's finished. And it's interesting. I remember my dad telling, because my grandfather, my dad's dad, I have no memory of him because I was very young when he passed away, but I've always had this curiosity and yearning about him. His picture as a boy is behind me because he was so self-made. It was such a great example of success. And he and my grandmother were people in the community that literally took people in, and that kind of thing. But I remember my dad telling me that when he passed away, when my grandfather passed away, my dad did not cry. And he always said that, and he was our example from an entrepreneurial standpoint too, because my dad said that, he had a job working for a gentleman that had a construction company when he was in New York, and he was on break from college. And right when he finished college, and he was like, I'm not working for anybody. I can't do this, because he had been in the family business since he was a kid. And he's like, there's no way I'm not doing that. I'm not having somebody tell me what to do. And what he would say is, the only general whose army I've ever been in is my father. And he said the only other army I've ever been in is the army of God, or as he would say, Allah, because he's my father's Muslim. Yeah. And he says, like, that's it. And very factual. You have to, I've learned over time what it means. Growing up, I felt that my dad was one that didn't show emotion unless he was, angry or joyful, but I don't know what it's like to see him actually really like hurt. And I still don't necessarily know exactly what that looks like, but I know what would hurt his feelings, that type of thing. So I've never seen him cry, never seen him disappointed, other than him kind of just say that. And that shaped me in that I was a naturally sensitive kid. And to a fault, because I was having a conversation with a client the other day. They were very direct with me, telling me what they wanted, what they didn't want. And then they were explaining, I know I'm kind of a tough cookie, but, I apologize. I'm just, no, you don't have to apologize at all. I'm at a point in my life where direct communication and honest feeling, I appreciate. And it's about balance, because you can be direct and be a jerk about things. And then you can also be vulnerable to a fault where, you cry for anything that takes place. And then, so there's a thought in some cultures where crying is a sign of weakness, especially for a man. For sure. But there's something to be said for how that's done and when that's done and everything. I think there's definitely nothing gained by never showing any emotion, because you're just less relatable. And it's funny because it's okay for a woman to cry, but yet it's not okay for a man to cry. And with either gender, we have all these rules that we're supposed to buy into in terms of which one is supposed to do, but balance and purpose, play their role in everything. And the same thing applies when it comes to showing emotion. And I have to admit, when I would cry easily, for about, a movie, or I could cry because I'm moved by a song, and that could be a great thing. Or, I was less comfortable with that earlier. Now, the older I get, the easier that happens, and the more comfortable I am with it. Although there have been times even on this show where, while I have shown emotion, I've had to sort of ratcheted back as much as I can, because I figured, there were 1 or 2 times where I felt like, I don't know if I can like go through with the show and be understood at the same time,
Yeah.
but I don't have any problem with that. So it varies and it evolves too.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think it's, I agree. I think it's a, I don't know if it's universal, but I feel like every time as we get older, men especially, and maybe it is something having to do with testosterone levels changing, estrogen levels increasing in men or something. But my fathers, both of them, over the course of their lives now are both significantly softer in demeanor, right? And again, it's a coming to, as I was joking about my back sore on my birthday, but the idea that, as our bodies change and as our the biological impact on our life as we age, it has an impact on our, on our emotions and how we portray ourselves. And so as Matt's saying, we can be strong and also have a softer side. And that's fun. I've seen as my parents have gotten older. And I think I've seen this consistent. Men who have this very strong held, but as they soften as they age.
Mm-hmm. So and it's funny because you were talking about, we were looking at the comments that are made for those that are viewing, on Facebook. Unless we highlight it, you won't necessarily see it on the YouTube broadcast. But our good friend Matt Failer is talking about, what you will see if you're talking about as a caregiver. There's a more softer side. If you're talking about when you're dealing with doctors or in an IEP or therapist or something like that, there might not be as much that shows. And what I would add to that is that I could have tears in a situation during, an IEP or a manner that consists of some kind of confrontation. But those types of tears, especially if I'm standing ground as a warrior parent, is going to, those are going to be different tears than ones that you shed in a moment of accomplishment or achieving, some kind of milestone or something like that with your child. So it's interesting. It varies.
Well, I think as when you have children, your warrior parent side comes out. And so, we always talk about, mama bears and papa bears, when it comes to this type of thing. My daughter, Jo, oops, I'll put Matt's comment up there again. Let's go to Jo. My daughter, Jo, Jordan, who is a constant contributor to our show. And she's, I love that because, we have a very close relationship. I think we speak every day. It's a weird day if we don't speak every day. But when you have children, you tend to be protective. And I think that parents are reluctant sometimes to show their anxiety and fear. They want to stand strong for their children. But those are really real emotions when you're a parent of a child at any kind of, whether they have some medically complex issue or some other special needs issue or cognitive issue, or even if you're just neurotypical. I think that parents, that emotion comes close to the edge, when we have children. I know that when I was we had an incident in my son's school this week that took me back to an incident that occurred when Jordan was in high school. And I find myself getting the heart and the throat kind of thing, and a little emotional, because I remember the fear and the trauma and the stuff that occurs when you are in a helpless situation that you can't do anything for your child. Mm-hmm. I think for parents of special needs children, not to move into this, into this other conversation, but we can. But when your child is first diagnosed, we've talked about this on this podcast many times. You really feel like you're helpless. Like there really feels like you can't do anything, and you immediately want to go fix, because that's what we do as men. We want to fix a problem, or then we can't fix it, so we want to blame somebody. So somebody else's fault.
I was thinking that's the other type of emotion and tears that can come about, which I've gotten even on the show with guests, which is that when you feel like you're got or understood, or that somebody sees you, that's the type of thing that can either strengthen your bond, as a couple, as parents, or if you're not on the same page, kind of pull you apart. But even when it is together, as is the case with my wife and I, when you're having a conversation with someone other than your spouse that gets you and gets the situation, sometimes it just hits you different, as you really, like, for instance, we had Thomas and Janice that were on, a couple episodes back, and he was talking about meeting Janice's son and that connection. And he said, I just felt like he was pure. And for some reason that hit me in a bunch of total, different ways, like just somebody seeing my son as pure. There's the notion of that. Another man doing that, whether it's you not being here, a local, a coach or something, just somebody, that's just, that's natural. And then Matt in the comments has asked me, how would I say my balance as a male has impacted my feelings and mood with my son and his journey? It continues to grow. There's times where when you're talking about emotions, the emotions, sometimes they don't necessarily serve. I was driving in traffic the other day and I turned my signal on and somebody blew the horn at me like right away. And it was only Elijah and I in the car. And that's a trigger for me. If I'm minding my business, so you just, by the same token, when you tap the horn, I'm like, oh, by all means. I just think that that's so courteous. You're just trying to get my attention. But when somebody's just like, I'm like, what? And so the emotion got the best of me at that point. And the fact that the driver was a woman, after we went about our way, Elijah was like, "Ooh, Daddy's angry." I just sat there and I felt like any positive mood that I had before that was completely doused. And it wasn't that, oh, she was so wrong and she pissed me off. I felt so bad that I had given in, and I was like, dude, you're controlled by somebody's horn. It's like a remote. That means somebody just pushes that button, they're going to get you to jump or do whatever. So in that sense, it's a work in progress because I don't want that to take place. There's other times where the emotions come out in terms of impatience. With Elijah, and it's funny, we were getting ready for school yesterday, and because he's very meticulous about everything. I'm holding up a pen here for those that are not, that are only listening. This has to be in place. It's got to be sitting this way. Everything has to be just right. And when you're trying to get out the door, that can be a little frustrating. And I remember thinking yesterday in particular, it hit me where I was just like, everything that he does requires our patience. And when you really stop and think of who he is, more often than not, it's a byproduct of the autism and not just some kid saying, wait a minute, I want vanilla, not chocolate. It's not just being a brat, and you're human. You can forget that sometimes. And so the balance is a constant work in progress. And then at the same time, I saw a post by a good friend of ours about a kid that attends high school here in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, 16 years old, on the autism spectrum. The post went up yesterday. He was missing as of 9 p.m. the night before. And at that point, I was like, the button is just completely pushed, and I'm just like flushed with worry, posting it and resharing it, asking people, please share as much as you can. And I've been thinking for the past 24 to almost 48 hours, like, I wonder if that kid's okay. And it's not like just, oh, that's sad and it's emotional. Elijah's 15. These things hit you, in a different manner and way. And sometimes how people receive what you have to say, it's received when real emotion, accompanies it. And there's not as much, for instance, I know I'm kind of all over the place. When we talk about our mission to provide financial services, education, and opportunity and ownership to the special needs community, I don't know how much emotion has come about in conveying that message, but based on some things that I've seen over the last week to week and a half, there's a new level of emotion that I feel in that regard, because I see people that have slipped through the cracks that don't have information. And, I might get emotional on occasion, with that, or to the point of it coming over and showing, maybe not. No, that's different. So it's all a work in progress, and just a matter of a part of, my own evolution for me personally.
Yeah. I think it's funny because for those of you who aren't seeing comments, Matt's continuing his questions along this path. One is recommendations to give to give to fathers to excel when there's the button. He calls it the clapper on and off. I call it the light switch. It's on, it's off. It's on, it's off. One of the things Matt's saying is triggers are a little more active for those of us who have children who are on the spectrum, or again, dealing with medically complex issues. And sometimes those challenges come up in the morning, and then, how do you get through the rest of the day without, being on, right? And I think that's honestly, I'm just going to say this because I'm now old. But I think it comes with the maturity, as when you're younger, that button is up, and once it's flipped, that button's on for a long time until it's somewhere. But when you're older, it's a little bit easier to turn that.
You're less stupid when you're older.
You're less stupid. Well, I think it's what you realize is that it doesn't behoove anybody to stay fired up, right? You want to be circumstantially appropriate for situation. Again, obviously somebody beat me in traffic. I will tell you a really funny story. I honestly laugh about this, but Matt, this is going to go to what you're talking about. And Shawn, follow up to what you're saying. Jordan and I were in the car many years ago, and I was particularly yes, you are still young, Matt. I am. Some people would say I'm a hothead, right? Or they can see that there's a potential of me becoming a hothead. But it's my sort of there's a part of me that doesn't, I don't tolerate fools easily. I don't really. Anyway, so just really briefly, I'll tell you, we're on 2-lane stretch on Melrose in Los Angeles. We're talking Melrose. It's a busy street, 2 ways, 2 lanes each way. And there was an SUV to the right of us who drifted into our lane. Now, the only way that I was going to go was into oncoming traffic. So I did what you said, Shawn. I beeped. I didn't lay on my horn. It was a beep beep. And as I pulled next to the person, I just sort of looked over, and the person had a livid reaction with the whole finger and everything. And that was a massive trigger for me because
you were minding your business. You were being nice.
Yeah, doing my thing. Hey, beep, beep, I'm here, man. Don't push me into traffic, right? And when he did that, yeah, that's it. It's all about the hair, right? Exactly right. It's exactly right, Matt. It's because my hair. It's why I'm a hothead. But when he did that, I remember reaching over Jordan, like pointing at him and just going a little nuts on the guy, right? Like, no, like that's not my fault. Like, this is your fault. Like, don't you take an aggressive tone with me. I'm just letting you know I'm here, right? And not so many words. And when he saw, how like aggressive I was, he kind of sheepishly kind of moved over and was quieted down. And Jordan was like, "Dad, relax." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. This makes me mad." And you know what it was? For me, it was, gotcha. And my kids, the sad thing is that my kids see it all the time. And the good thing is that my kids see it all the time, because when it comes to my children, any sense of danger, I am that guy.
Yeah.
Safety, protection. I'm that guy. I'm all in, hardcore, and people who know it. In fact, again, an incident at my son's high school this week. The parent group who've never heard my name before, the parent group that's associated with that school now know who I am. So does the Los Angeles Unified School District and a number of other people. I'm going to say like LAPD and whatnot, but because I take a frontline approach when it comes to protecting and guarding my children and making sure that the systems that are in place to support and protect our kids are actually there, so that I can be at ease knowing that when my children, are in this. The last thing that you want, and we've had a rash of these situations at schools across the country over the last 20 years. When I'm a parent and I drop my child off at school, I don't want to have to pray that my child's going to come home. Mm-hmm. I don't want that to have to be part of my daily ritual, that I pray that my child comes out of the gate when school is over. And unfortunately, we have had way too many incidences. We've got, between social media and, the pandemic, which has created a new sense of anxiety and if you think about it, my youngest child spent the last year and a half at home doing school over Zoom. Now as a freshman in high school with almost 3,000 students, some of whom are adult age, he's 14.
Mm-hmm.
That's an environment that already creates a lot of anxiety for him. We all know what high school is about. All the movies and songs that have ever been written and movies that have been made about kids in high school, like, right? We all know that there's anxiety and a sense of, the feeling of fitting in and belonging, and, our hormones are beginning to rage, and all of the things that come with that, I don't want to have to be in a situation where I'm hoping that my child comes home at the end of the day. And I stood in front of the school on Monday to make sure that my child came out of school. Right. And again, just to be clear, no actual incident happened. It was just enough of a threat that caused a major concern, and the way that the school handled it.
And it's interesting because I was going to say some of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of what does it mean, how do you define masculinity, which gender has, cornered the market on this emotion versus that emotion. Like a lot of the things that we say end up, blurring lines, because in that case, you're just being a dad, and the emotions, bubble over as they should, but that transcends gender.
For sure. I mean, the funny thing about it is that the majority of the parents that I was in communication with happened to be moms.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple of dads. There were a couple of dads who, were trying to figure out how to affect change. But the bottom line is, again, we've seen it here on this podcast with many of the people who fight for our children in the special needs community. Mom, we call them all warriors, and that's what they are. They truly are warriors. And I don't think that has to be necessarily a masculine role. We've always applied it to the male side of the conversation. The men are the warriors, the women are the nurturers. I think, again, those of us that are fairly evolved or highly evolved have the ability to do both and be both and tap into both as a resource as necessary. In the particular case, when it comes to a threat, for me, I pull from the male warrior side and go all in. And Jordan will say that. She'll say, I'm a warrior dad. But anyways, we kind of went off topic. But
it leads into the other point, which is that, I don't know what the numbers are in terms of dads that lead from the front and step up in those situations, but they tend to, at least from the outside looking in and just looking at stories and even the people that the majority of the parents that step forth usually tend to be moms. And especially based on what you were saying, that most of the parents that you were dealing with were in fact moms. I think that's where a platform like our show, and there are others out there in and outside of special needs, need to exist to encourage men to step up, step forth, and step into those situations and be a voice and be heard. And I think that what happens is, just as Matt pointed out in the notes, is the idea of letting people know that they're not alone, letting dads know that they're not alone, and that it's okay to step forward. That's we need more of that.
Yeah, and I think that we tend to that many of us tend to hide behind what we call social mores about how we're supposed to act based on our gender and based on our role and everything. And one of the best things that I have that has, in my opinion, that's come out of this ongoing conversation, just two dads having a conversation about things in life, right? The best thing is that we have created this sort of fellowship with other dads who find it, a sense of comfort and a sense of belonging to a group of like-minded individuals who not afraid to show emotion, not afraid to be vulnerable, not afraid to express their true concerns, fears, vulnerabilities, their true issues, and then be able to do something about it. I think historically we've sort of hidden behind this fake notion, this fake moat of, you know, I'm the man in my castle, and, you know, I'm not going to let anybody in. I think that we've created an opening, and we'll continue to create an opening for dads. And again, guys, men like Matt Failer, who are also dealing with, you know, his child has medically complex issues. He's a fighter. He's a warrior. Some people won't relate to Matt because they don't have that, you know, that atypical, you know, child situation. Those who do get it. But here's the best part about, in my opinion, I'll get off my soapbox. Men who are fathers to children who deal with the issues that we all deal with bring a level of complexity to other men who have neurotypical children. We can lead the way. We can show that what we do, what we fight for, the concerns that we have impact in a positive way the entire community. It's whether, by the way, cross-cultural, you know, cross-religion, cross-age. There's a lot of things that we do where we're telling people this is okay. It's okay to tap into this. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be a fighter. It's okay to take your situation and turn it and impact the community. We had, you know, Billy Price on and talked about Billy Footwear, somebody who took his own personal situation and turned it into something, a business that's successful, that is, you know, doing something for our community. That's what this really is all about. It's all about, you know, again, as Matt's saying, you know, a greater purpose in life, that what we're doing, we only go around once, right? The impact that we have on our community as we occupy this space here, right? The impact that we can have on our community is what's important, and not being afraid to share those things that are meaningful, because they know that they can have meaning for other people.
And it starts by acknowledging, at the very least, hey, you're afraid. You know, I was talking with someone the other day, teenager, and we talked about the idea of, you know, becoming a parent. It's probably something you really want to do one day, I'm sure. And the response I got was, I don't know that I want to do that. Just like the idea of being a parent, not knowing what to do and having to figure all of that out. It's almost like if you stop and think about what it means to be a parent, as opposed to stopping and thinking of how badly you might want to, you know, as a man, have a chip off the old block, or a daughter that you wear in, you know, dresses that you had as a girl yourself, or something like that. Once you take your own desires out of the way and you think of becoming a parent and really stop and think about it, you know, I guess it's kind of a scary prospect. But if you really took that approach with anything, we wouldn't have the technology that we need to have the show. We wouldn't do anything, because we would stay where we are and we wouldn't even venture. But by the same token, it's okay to say, you know what, I'm afraid. I'm concerned. I'm not sure what to do, or, you know, or where to turn. So before we wrap up, when we get closer to the end of our hour, I want to make sure that we give people a couple, you know, pointers in terms of encouraging them, especially any men out there, or anyone that knows men that are dads and might be unsure, might be afraid, just don't know necessarily what to do. But at the same time, encourage them to reach out to us, because the one thing I like to say is that, you know, we don't have all the answers, but we're striving to find as many as we possibly can and share them and bring people together that do in fact have answers.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting. So I was thinking about it as you were talking, you know, when men are successful in business, it's interesting because very rarely do you hear that I did this, you know, because my father XYZ, right? And in fact, a lot of times, like, what was Elon Musk's father like? What was Bill Gates' father like? What was, you know, I've never really ever heard them publicly, or even reading anything about them, really known much about their father. You know, where it does show up is in sports. You know, in sports, you have an athlete, and dads have a very prominent role in that guidance and that placement. You know, and again, it's very stereotypical. But I'm thinking about that from the perspective of, you know, we never really see these titans of business talk about what their fathers did. And in fact, a lot of times you'll see, well, my dad had a modest career. My dad was worked as a teacher in a high school, and now I'm a multi-billionaire. You know, it's an interesting thing to see the roles. So when I hear people say things like, as a teenager, I don't know if I'm ever going to be a child. I don't think any teenager knows what that means to have children, or what that is. But I just think about, as we guide our children to be the best possible humans that they can be in the world, all we can do is give them the tools. At some point, my son is calling me from his school, which actually makes me a little nervous. But at some point, we need to have some, some protections and some guidance. I've totally lost my train of thought. How do you like that? But here, Shawn, take that while I go mute here just for a quick second.
No, that makes sense. I think it's funny. This kind of bleeds right into everything that we've been talking about in terms of, in most cases, and we're doing this live, in most cases, Brian probably wouldn't even necessarily take the call. You'd respond with a text, "Hey, hit you when I'm done." But because of everything else that has taken place over the past week that he's talked about, that changes everything.
Yeah. Immediately go into, I love you all. I love this. I love our audience. I love our people. But, again, in this particular case, it's sort of like health and safety when it comes to my children is the first thing. And if he's calling me from school, I'm taking that call. So I apologize. It was actually him and some friends wishing me happy birthday. So lovely. I'm still not sure why after a year and a half, he doesn't know that at this time we are doing a podcast, but something else. And I'm okay with it because I'm going to let it slide. But anyways, and Shawn, I'm sorry that I missed your comment. And this is the thing that I was kind of leading to. There's no handbook what it takes to be a parent, right? You can only go off what you've learned, what you know, what you see.
But as a kid, you think your parents know all the answers too.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, because when it comes to your dad too, it's like, that's what a man does. That's how a man is. That's what you do. And it's written someplace. Don't know the book, but that's exactly how it is. And they have all the answers.
Yeah, no, for sure. Mark Twain's has a great quote, right? When I was 7 years old, my father knew everything. And when I was 14, my father knew nothing. So think about this as it relates. And then when I turned 21, I was surprised to see how much the old man had learned in the last 7 years. It's perspective, right? It's perspective. Yeah. And I think that we as parents try, my children have there's no misunderstanding. There's no sense of, lack of confidence or they know for sure where I stand when it comes to their protection and their safety. There's no like wishy-washy. I wonder what dad's going to say about this. Like they know where I stand. To me, my role as a father, as a parent, is to make sure that my children know that they've got a foundation of safety and love and support, and wherever they are going, whatever they're doing, that I'm there. I'm an advocate, I'm an ally, and I'm a cheerleader. And I'll do whatever I can to support them. There's no doubt about that. And again, where that falls under the masculine, sort of feminine role, I don't know, but that's where I stand. I think that's right. Go ahead. I was commenting.
Oh yeah. No, I was going to say that's interesting because I don't know which is more important. I think that they're equally important. It's important to, in fact, be there, be that support, be there for them, for there to be no doubt. In fact, it's another thing for them to know. Those are two different things too, because in some cases, some people are like, when a parent steps forth and does something, it's like, oh, I didn't know they quite felt that way. But the other thing is, and I'm sure your kids would attest to it, as I know mine would, if they just know for a fact that you're going to, no pun intended, but literally, emotionally or literally, take a bullet for them. Be there. If they know that you're going to do that, no matter how certain they are, there's still a difference between knowing it and seeing it in action and being reminded of it. Meaning that can never happen too many times.
And I think sometimes when we deal with our children, who again have, are in the special needs community or dealing with medically complex or cognitive issues. We as men sometimes forget that it's just as important for our children to understand that and see that as well. And really, because we feel like, again, we became members of a club that we didn't buy the membership to, right? We just, you know, we're part of it, and we deal with all of our emotions. But at the same time, as Matt had said, like, we want to fight for our children. We fight to give them the best care. We fight to give them the best opportunity. We had Dan Habib on the show, you know, about over a year ago. He's a filmmaker who has his son Samuel, whose birthday, by the way, was yesterday. And they, you know, they work together, and they're filmmakers. And Sam has a highly, you know, medically complex issue, a very rare genetic disease as well. And so, but Dan and Samuel have worked together and tireless. And I would say, even though we haven't seen it, but Samuel would articulate that Dan is that warrior for him as well. And that our role is to make sure that our children have the best possible opportunity to not just survive, but thrive. And that should be all there is. Like, there really, how it comes out, how you do it, you know, that's up to you. That's a personal thing. But the bottom line is, the thing that we can do to help other dads in this world, whether they're dealing with a neurotypical or an atypical child, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is the same. You fight to give your chance the best opportunity to thrive.
Definitely, most definitely. That goes without saying. And I think that it's funny. I don't know why I got to thinking of dads in situations that step in as stepdads to do those things also. You know, again, it's almost as though the gender doesn't matter, but what happens is, the only reason we have the discussion, and you even ask the question of, what does masculinity mean to you? You know, or what does femininity mean to someone? The only reason we're doing that is because we're battling against what society says one gender should handle versus what the other shouldn't. And the truth of the matter is, you know, when it comes to cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house, making sure that things are financially stable because of money that's coming in, that is a responsibility of both people, or in some cases, if you're a single parent, one person. It doesn't really matter necessarily who does it. It's interesting how it affects the manner in which children go out into the world, and you know, and everything. And again, what we teach our kids, what we tell them, what we think we're teaching them by giving instruction, pales in comparison to what we teach them by giving example. For sure.
And I think, you know, and again, I'll paraphrase Matt's comment for those that are listening. The idea of involving others, involving our younger generation, involving others that are outside of our community in the work that we all do, which as we always say this, you know, it stems from the place of, you know, empathy and love. We can let folks know that, you know, again, no life is perfect, and there are no two people that are exactly the same. Even twins do not have the exact same life experience. So, you know, the fact that because of that, you know, we empathize with those that are dealing with challenging issues, or issues that may be different than what our experience is. And by the way, again, that goes across culture, it goes across age, it goes across gender, it goes right. And so just creating an awareness and a sense of, again, I keep using the same word over and over, but a sense of empathy for those in our community, to know that, you know, that they're cared for, as we've talked about before, that know that there's our causes, and there are things worth fighting for, and stepping up into that role is, you know, our job as dads, and our job as parents, and our job as partners. We've used the term ally a lot over the last couple of years, but truly being an ally for our family and for our community. That's the thing that we promote and talk about quite a bit on this podcast. So
yeah, it's funny. You said the word empathy, and you did mention that a lot. And I thought, okay, I thought of something. So it's like, how would one describe masculinity? Well, I just thought of a word that should be used to describe it, and I can't think of a better word than empathy. You know, because you're just simply talking about the ability to step into other people's shoes or be curious about them. And it goes back to something I've said so many times, which is, you know, we should be more childlike and less childish, you know, which simply means having a curiosity about each other. You know, I don't know if I can think of a thing that defines what masculinity should mean. You know, the list of things where I would say, you know, as a man, here's what this means to me, or as a man, that means something, or as a man, that's not okay, or, you know, or empowering. And the only thing is, and again, it's because of the norms that society is, you know, is put on you. But in terms of being a provider, whether it's financial or emotional, those are things that, you know, go hand in hand with being, I don't know, whether you operate from the standpoint that a man is head of the household, or you're acknowledging that there's a partnership. Either way, those things go hand in hand. And it's funny because you and I were talking earlier about, you know, and this, I apologize to the audience, this is a little all over the place. We were talking about the idea, you know, I will usually end the show, I talk about, you know, we like to say there is no such thing as special needs. Everyone needs to be seen, needs to be heard. And you brought something to my attention, which is that, you know, as much of a revelation as I thought I was having by acknowledging that there aren't any special needs, you run the risk of being counterproductive and then marginalizing a community which needs to know that, you know, there are accommodations and things that are different. So, you know, as opposed to saying that there aren't any special needs, it's like everybody needs the same thing. And I'm sorry, now I'm really entering the rambling phase, but I'm thinking of just what those things mean as it pertains to, you know, labels, whether that label is based on gender, based on having a disability or catastrophic injury or whatever the case might be. So I guess what I'm saying is, in addition to empathy being a word that describes how you would define masculinity, hopefully it also means just being more of a human being, just connecting with people.
Yeah. I mean, I think somebody would argue, oh, that's not masculinity. That's just being human.
Right.
But the reality is that masculinity, as it's been defined from the beginning of man, as, you know, man, fighter, warrior, you know, as if women can't be that. We know that that's not the case. And that, you know, women are nurturers, as if we think that men cannot be nurturing, you know.
Right.
And these positions that we've been talking about as men, we talk about them from the place of being dads, because the show is called Just Two Dads. But I would say that in our relationships, while our partners may not always agree with our methods or our methodology,
right,
knowing that we have that same allyship, that same force of, you know, of protection and, you know, and fighting for their causes, our partners, you know, in our relationships should know that that's who we are too. Again, as I said, my children have no doubt. The people who are very close to me have no doubt where I stand positionally as it relates to them and their causes and their issues and I find that to be, frankly, a highly masculine role. I mean, a highly masculine trait in that particular case, that I'm always going to be in the fight. I'm always going to be in the fight. I'm always going to be in the fight. And I think that's where the empathy piece comes from. I empathize with you, what you're doing, so you can count me as an ally to always be in the fight.
Right.
Then on that note, since we're getting close to the end of our 1 hour, were there some things that you wanted to, bullet points that you wanted to share with some folks of things that people would do? Is that what you were going to?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, the one thing is if you're, and this is as a dad, period. But if you're a dad to a child with special needs, if you feel like you're unsure, you don't know where you're going to turn, or you're simply afraid, and you've got questions. We don't claim to have all the answers, but we know enough people, and the number of people continues to grow, where we definitely know people that have answers to what those questions, concerns, or fears might be. And you can always reach out to us at our email address, which is wearejusttwodads. That is TWO. We are just two dads @gmail.com. Our entire goal and purpose for this platform and the show is to bring people together, you know, to build a village and have multiple people in a position to raise a hand when someone says, does anybody know a good therapist? Does anybody know a good mechanic? Does anybody know a good whatever? Just to improve the quality of people's lives. And then the other thing is, you know, reach out to people that you do know. There's more people out there that have the same concerns, thoughts, and fears, and hopes and dreams that you do as well. you're not as alone as you think. And we just want to make sure that that you take the time to take advantage of any and everything that's out there. And at the same time, if you're listening to this and you know of resources that we might not know of, reach out to us and share that with us as well too.
Yeah. And I want to, thank Shawn Hall in Hawaii, who's always been, who's always there as our show producer. He's in the background. He's always nudging us, 5 minutes, guys, 5 minutes, but always kind of keeping us on track, keeping us on course. And Shawn Hall, we love you. Thank you for your partnership and for everything that you do for us and for your family and your community. And be safe out there. I know that there's some storms out in Hawaii that could create some flooding, so please be careful and be safe out there. For everybody else, as we wrap up the show, and I'm going to just to repeat the thing that I say all the time, and it's so evident, again in this conversation today. Empathy and love is what drives us, right? Again, look at everybody's situation from the perspective of empathy. Their situation may be something that you don't understand the full story. You don't really know where they're coming from. You don't know, what it's all about. So be open to being empathetic to their situation. By the way, I'm telling myself this as well as I took a bulldog role with this situation at school and have come to understand and provide, some guidance and some support to other parents and also be empathetic to the issues and the challenges that administrators at our schools face as well. So giving them some basic credit, because partially that it also comes from love. If you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world would be a better place. So Shawn, on that note, Shawn Francis, I love you, and I love doing this partnership with you, and great way to spend my birthday lunch with you and with the people who have contributed today and the people who listen to us all over the place. Just your sharing some of your time to tune into what we're talking about is a massive gift to me, and I accept it. So thank you so much for all of that. Shawn, I'll let you close us out here for the show.
My pleasure and privilege to be here as always. And again, to be here with you on your birthday. I want to make sure that I encourage people to follow our YouTube page where you'll find all our episodes. Please subscribe, like, and share. And as always, I want to make sure that I thank the women in my life without whom I could not even begin to make an attempt to be who I hope to be. And that means my mom, Jan Francis, and my amazing wife, Laura. Thank you very much. And for everybody watching, again, thanks for tuning in. And if you're watching this, we love you.
We love you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, Shawn. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. We love you. Have a great day, everybody.